All right. Welcome to Real Country. I think we're finally live now. A little bit rusty here, and I was getting an error message. Looks like it's not going on X, but we are on YouTube and Facebook. So the plan that I had originally for today kind of got sidetracked because my son wanted to hang out with me this morning, and so I didn't get to finish my prep. So I think what I'm going to do is that I am actually just going to dive into the text and see how far we get. And then I might do a part two, a little bit more in-depth analysis later on, maybe next week. And well, first of all, like why letter four? Why did I decide on letter four? I decided on letter four because I got an email from someone who's a Grail Country listener who talked about how much they learned from our previous episode on Meditations on the Tarot Letter 4 and how they appreciated the interpretation that was offered in that episode. And so I just that as a sign that maybe this was something to dive back into. So let me go ahead and pull up the PDF and I will just dive right into the text. I'm searching for it on my drive right now. That's letter 10. Let me search my hard drive here. I was in a class like right up until go time. So, okay, where is the location? I got the text open, but I need to find what the location. Let me see. Open file location. It is in. Okay, so it is in the downloads directory. So why wasn't it finding it when I went? Okay, let's try this one more time. Slides and PDFs, your computer, upload a file, go up to the downloads directory, and then we want weird. Why doesn't it come up when I search it? Well, okay, I've wasted enough time with that. So let's just stick with this view. And you'll just have to deal with me having my gaze averted up. Because I've got another monitor that's up above my head. It's a 43-inch TV. And I'm going to put the text there. And we'll dive in. I do think I want to put on an image of the put up an image of the card though. So let me see here. Image file. Oh, that is actually pages from the pages, not the actual image of the. Okay, well, I'll just go. Okay, just picture in your head as I go here the image from the Emperor card, specifically from the Marseille Tarot. That is what Tomberg is working from. So he begins the letter with a quote from Scripture. Benedictus qui venit in nomine Domini. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Luke 13:35. And then we dive into the text of letter 4. The very first image you have is an image of the emperor on the card, which is going to describe as it goes in the letter. He begins the letter, "Dear unknown friend." This is how every single letter of Meditations on the Tarot begins. He addresses them to unknown friend. The less superficial a person is, and the more he knows is capable of, the greater is his authority. To be something, to know something, and to be capable of something is what endows a person with authority. This is what the subject of this letter is authority. How do I view that? Wow, I haven't done this in a long time. It used to just kind of automatically show me the, oh, here we go. Okay, here's the comments. Okay, now I'm actually seeing the comments. So we've got a new member, and we've got, let's see. Okay, cool. All right, here we go. All right, yes, I'm going through the text, and because it just doesn't make sense for me to talk about it without people having reference to the text that I'm talking about. Okay, so he's already established what the subject of the Emperor card is for this spiritual exercise, this meditation. The subject is authority. One can also say that a person has authority in proportion to what he unites within himself of the profundity of mysticism, the direct wisdom of gnosis, and the productive power of magic. Okay. Now, before you freak out here, I think it is worth noting what Tomberg is talking about when he uses those words. So this is like the shortest way, this is the shortest, most succinct way I can put it. When Tomberg says mysticism, he means the experience of God. When he says Gnostic, contrary to the Gnostic notion of secret doctrine, what he means is the understanding of spiritual realities and the process by which we come into the understanding of spiritual realities. And by magic, he means participation in divine action, which puts it in counter distinction from sorcery, which is simply the delusion or desire to impose one's will on reality. So magic here, in the sense of divine magic that he's speaking about here, operates in precisely the opposite direction because it is accomplished through the uniting of the human will with the divine will. Okay. Whosoever has to a certain degree can be found. Whoever has this, that is this authority, to a certain degree can found a school. Whosoever has it to a still higher degree can, and he puts this in quotation marks, can lay down the law. It is authority alone which is the true and unique power of law. This is very important here, the next sentence. He says, compulsion is only an expedient to which one takes recourse in order to remedy the lack of authority. Tomberg will be very clear elsewhere in the text, not necessarily in this letter, but elsewhere in the text will be very clear that this authority is the way in which God operates. God does not act with compulsion upon his creation, which he allows its freedom. Where there is authority, i.e., where there is present the breath of sacred magic, filled by the rays of light of gnosis, emanated from the profound fire of mysticism, their compulsion is superfluous. Now, the Emperor of the fourth Arcanum of the Tarot does not have a sword or any other weapon. He holds a scepter. The image on the card, you will see that the Emperor is holding a scepter, which is on the top of the scepter is a globe with a cross. He rules by means of the scepter and by the scepter alone. This is why the first idea that the card naturally evokes is that of the authority underlying the law. The thesis which proceeds from meditation on the three preceding arcana, he's talking about the three previous letters 1 through 3, is that all authority has its source in the ineffable divine name. And he gives the letters of the divine name, Yud He Vav He. And all that law derives from this. And all law derives from this. So all authority, all law is ultimately derived from the divine name itself. The importance of the divine name is a very common theme in scripture, and I think we seldom really understand the depths to which it goes. One of the texts that I'm dying to get to at some point is Bulgakov's book on names and the mystical and symbolic importance of names. The implication here is that the human bearer of true authority does not replace divine authority, but on the contrary, cedes his place to it. He has to renounce something to this end. The card teaches us, in the first instance, that the emperor has renounced compulsion and violence. He has no weapons, scepter in place of the sword. His right hand holds the scepter forward, on which his gaze is fixed, and his left hand holds his tightly fastened belt. In the image on the card, the emperor is like holding his onto his belt. He is neither standing nor sitting. He's in kind of a reclined position against the throne. So he's got his weight leaning against the throne, but he's not fully standing up and he's not sitting down. He is simply leaning back against the lowered throne and has only one foot placed on the ground. His legs are crossed. The shield adorned with an eagle rests on the ground at his side. Lastly, he is wearing a large and heavy crown. The context of the card expresses active renunciation rather than the renunciation of constraint alone. The emperor has renounced ease, not being seated. He has renounced walking, being in a leaning position and having his legs crossed. He may neither advance in order to take the offensive nor move back in order to retreat. His station is by his seat at his coat of arms. He is on sentry duty, and as such, he does not have freedom of movement. He is a guardian bound to his post. What he guards is fundamentally the scepter. Now, the scepter is not an implement with which one is empowered to do something or other. It is, from a practical point of view, a symbol serving nothing. The emperor has therefore renounced all action, having pledged his right hand to the scepter that he holds before him, whereas his left hand holds his fastened belt. It is no longer free because the emperor restrains himself with it. It serves the function of holding the impulsive and instinctive nature of the emperor in check, so that it does not intervene and divert him from his post as guardian. The emperor has therefore renounced movement by means of his legs and action by means of his arms. At the same time, he wears a large and heavy crown, and we have already meditated upon the meaning of the crown with regard to that of the empress, which is letter 2, which has a double meaning. It is a sign of legitimacy on the one hand, but it is also a sign of a task or mission by which the crown is charged from above. Thus, every crown is essentially a crown of thorns. Not only is it heavy, but it also calls for painful restraint with regard to the thought and free or arbitrary imagination of the personality. It certainly emits rays outward, but these same rays become thorns for the personality within. They play the role of nails piercing and crucifying each thought or image of the personal imagination. Here, true thought receives confirmation and subsequent illumination. False or irrelevant thought is riveted and reduced to impotence. The crown of the emperor signifies the renunciation of freedom of intellectual movement, just as his arms and legs signify the renunciation of freedom of action and movement. He is deprived of the three so-called natural, and he has this in quotation marks, liberties of the human being, those of opinion, word, and movement. Authority demands this. But this is not all. The shield bearing an eagle rests on the ground at his side. The emperor does not hold it with his hand as the empress does. The shield is certainly there, but it belongs rather to the throne than to the person of the emperor. This means to say that the purpose for which the emperor is on sentry duty is not his, but that of the throne. The emperor does not have a personal mission. He has renounced this in favor of the throne. Or in esoteric terms, he has no name. He is anonymous because the name, the mission, belongs to the throne. He is not there in his own name, but rather in the name of the throne. This is the fourth renunciation of the emperor, the renunciation of a personal mission or a name, and the esoteric meaning of the word. It is said that nature has a horror of emptiness, horror vacui. The spiritual counter-truth here is that spirit has a horror of fullness. It is necessary to create a natural emptiness. And this is what renunciation achieves in order for the spiritual to manifest itself. The Beatitudes of the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5, verses 3 through 12, state this fundamental truth. The first Beatitude, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven, means to say that those who are rich in spirit, who are filled with the spiritual kingdom of man, have no room for the kingdom of heaven. Revelation presupposes emptiness, space put at its disposal in order to manifest itself. This is why it is necessary to renounce personal opinion in order to receive the revelation of the truth. Personal action in order to become an agent for sacred magic. The way or method of personal development in order to be guided by the master of ways. And one's personally chosen mission in order to be charged with a mission from above. The emperor has established in himself this fourfold emptiness. This is why he is emperor. This is why he is authority. He has made a place in himself for the divine name. And again, he gives the Yud-He, Vav-He, which is the source of authority. He has renounced personal intellectual initiative, and the emptiness which results is filled by divine initiative, or the Yod of the sacred name. He has renounced action and movement, and the void which results is filled by the revelationary action and magical movement from above, i.e., by the He and the Vav of the divine name. Here he has renounced his personal mission. He has become anonymous, and the emptiness which results is filled with the authority, or the second He of the divine name, i.e., he becomes the source of law and order. Lao Tzu reveals the Arcanum of authority in his Tao Te Ching. He says, 30 spokes unite in one nave, and because of the part where nothing exists, we have the use of a carriage wheel. Clay is molded into vessels, and because of the space where nothing exists, we're able to use them as vessels. Doors and windows are cut out in the walls of a house, and because they are empty spaces, we are able to use them. Therefore, on the one hand, we have the benefit of existence, and on the other, we make use of non-existence. And again, be humble, and you will remain entire. Be bent, and you will remain straight. Be vacant, and you will remain full. Be worn, and you will remain new. He who has little will receive. He who has much will be embarrassed. Therefore, the sage keeps to one and becomes the standard for the world. He does not display himself, therefore he shines. He does not approve himself, therefore he is noted. He does not praise himself, therefore he has merit. He does not glory in himself, therefore he excels. And because he does not compete, therefore no one in the world can compete with him. This is from the Tao Te Ching. And then Tomber goes on. Because he has authority. God governs the world by authority and not by force. If this were not so, there would be neither freedom nor law in the world. And the first three petitions of the Lord's Prayer, Sanctificator nomen tuum, adveniat regnum tuum, fiat voluntas tua sicut in cielo et in terra, would lose all meaning. He who prays these petitions does so solely with the purpose of affirming and increasing divine authority and not divine power. The God who is almighty, not virtually, but actually, has no need to be petitioned that his reign may come and that his will may be done. The meaning of this prayer is that God is powerful only insofar as his authority is freely recognized and accepted. Prayer is the act of such recognition and acceptance. One is free to be believing or unbelieving. Nothing and no one can compel us to have faith. No scientific discovery, no logical argument, no physical torture can force us to believe, i.e., to freely recognize and accept the authority of God. But on the other hand, once this authority is recognized and accepted, the powerless becomes powerful. Then divine power can manifest itself, and this is why it is said that a grain of faith is sufficient to move mountains. Now, the problem of authority is at the same time of mystical, Gnostic, magical, and Hermetic significance. It comprises the Christian mystery of crucifixion and the mystery of withdrawal, Sodhat Simsum, of the Lurianic Kabbalah. Here there are some considerations which can help us arrive at the most profound meditation upon this mystery. The Christian world worships the crucifix, i.e., the image expressing the paradox of Almighty God reduced to a state of extreme powerlessness. And it is in this paradox that one sees the highest revelation of the divine in the whole history of mankind. One sees there, in the most perfect revelation, the God of love. The Christian creed says, Crucifixus etiam por nobis sub Pontio Pilato, passus et sepultus est. For our sake he was crucified under Pontius Pilate, he suffered death and was buried. The only Son of the eternal Father nailed to the cross for our sake. This is what is divinely impressed upon all open souls, including the robber crucified to the right. This impression is unforgettable and inexpressible. It is the immediate breath of God which has inspired and still inspires thousands of martyrs, confessors of the faith, virgins, and recluses. But it is not so that every human being finding himself facing the crucifix may be thus divinely moved. There are those who react the opposite way. It was so at the time of Calvary, it is so today. And those who passed by derided him, wagging their heads and saying, "If you are the Son of God, come down from the cross." Matthew 27, verses 39 and 40. The chief sacrifices, with the scribes and the elders, also mocked him, saying, "He saved others, he cannot save himself. If he is the King of Israel, let him come down from the cross, and we will believe in him. He trusts in God, let God deliver him now, if he loves him." Matthew 27, verses 42 through 43. This is the other reaction. Nowadays, we encounter exactly the same. For example, in Soviet radio broadcasts in Moscow, he wrote this when the Soviet Union was still a thing. The argument for Moscow is always the same. If God exists, he must know that we, the communists, dethrone him. Why does he not give a visible sign, if not of his power, at least of his existence? Why does he not defend his own interests? This, in other words, is the old argument. Come down from the cross and we will believe in you. I cite these well-known things because they reveal a certain dogma underlying them. It is the dogma or philosophical principle which states that truth and power are identical. That which is powerful is true, and that which is powerless is false. According to this dogma or philosophical principle, which has become that of the modern technological science, power is the absolute criterion and supreme ideal of truth. Only that which is powerful is of the divine. Now, this is a very important part. Now, there are open and secret worshippers of the idol of power, for it is an idol and the source of all idolatry. Also in Christian factions or in religious and spiritual circles in general. I'm not speaking about Christian or spiritually minded princes or politicians who covet power, but rather about the adherents to doctrines advancing the primacy of power. Here, there are two categories. Those who aspire to the ideal of the Superman, and those who believe in a God that is actually almighty, and therefore responsible for all that happens. He's talking to you, Calvinists. Among esotericists, occultists, and magicians, there are many, be it openly or secretly, who aspire to the ideal of the Superman. In the meantime, they often pose as masters or high priests worthy of the acclaim of the future Superman. They are at the same time singularly in agreement that they raise God far, very far, to the heights of absolute abstraction, so that he does not discomfort them in his too concrete presence, and in order that they have room for themselves to be able to develop their own greatness without the rival grandeur of the divine to discomfort them. They build their individual towers of Babel, which fall as a rule according to the law of all towers of Babel, and experience sooner or later a salutary fall, as is the teaching of the 16th card of the tarot. The tower is letter 16. They do not fall from a real height into a real abyss. It is only from an imaginary height that they fall, and they only fall to the ground. I.e., they learn the lesson that we human beings of today have all learned, or still have to learn, or have still to learn. The worship of the idol of power, conceived of as the Superman, above all when one identifies oneself with it, is relatively inoffensive, being fundamentally infantile. But this is not so with the other category of power worshippers, namely those who project this ideal onto God himself. Their faith in God depends only on the power of God. If God was powerless, they would not believe in him. It is they who teach that God has created souls predestined to eternal damnation. I told you he was talking about the Calvinists. And others predestined to salvation. It is they who make God responsible for the entire history of the human race, including all its atrocities. God, they say, chastises his disobedient children by means of wars, revolutions, tyrannies, and other similar things. How could it be otherwise? God is almighty, therefore all that happens is only able to happen through his action or with his consent. The idol of power has such a hold on some human minds that they prefer a God who is a mixture of good and evil, provided that he is powerful, to a God of love who reigns only by the intrinsic authority of the divine, by truth, beauty, and goodness, i.e., they prefer a God who is actually almighty to the crucified God. However, the father in the parable of the prodigal child had neither sent his son far from his paternal home in order to lead a life of debauchery, nor had he prevented him from leaving and forced him to lead a life which was pleasing to him, the father. All he did was await his return and go to meet him when the prodigal son was approaching his father's home. Everything which took place in the story of the prodigal son, save for his return to the father, was clearly contrary to the will of the father. Now the history of the human race since the fall is that of the prodigal son. It is not a matter of the law of evolution according to the divine plan of modern theosophists, but rather of an abuse of freedom similar to that of the prodigal son. And the key formula of the history of humanity is to be found neither in the progress of civilization, nor in the process of evolution, or in any other process, but rather in the parable of the prodigal son. In other words, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me as one of your hired servants. Luke 15, verses 18 through 19. Is mankind, therefore, solely responsible for its history? Without a doubt, because it is not God who has willed it to be as such. God is crucified in it. One understands this when one takes account of the significance of the fact of human freedom, and likewise the freedom of beings of the spiritual hierarchies, the angels, archangels, principalities, powers, virtues, dominions, thrones, cherubim, and seraphim. All these beings, including man, the iskim, have an existence that is either real or illusory. This is why I always ask the Calvinists, how can they account for the real existence of beings? They have an existence that is either real or illusory. If they have a real existence, if they are not a mirage, they are independent entities endowed not only with phenomenal independence, but also with noumenal independence. Now, noumenal independence is what we understand by freedom. Freedom, in fact, is nothing other than the real and complete existence of a being created by God. To be free and to exist are synonymous from a moral and spiritual point of view. Just as morality would not exist without freedom, so would an unfree spiritual entity, soul or spirit, not exist for itself, but be part of another spiritual entity which is free, which really exists. Freedom is the spiritual existence of beings. When we read in the scripture that God created all beings, the essential meaning here is that God has given freedom or existence to all beings. Freedom, once having been given, God does not take it back. This is why the beings of the 10 hierarchies mentioned above are immortal. Death, not separation from the body, but real death, would be the absolute deprivation of liberty, i.e., the complete destruction of the existence given by God. But who or what can take the divine gift of freedom, the divine gift of existence, from a being? Freedom, existence, is inalienable, and the beings of the 10 hierarchies are immortal. The statement, freedom or existence is inalienable, can be understood as the highest gift, the very greatest value imaginable. Then this would be a foretaste of paradise, or as condemnation to a perpetual existence, then this would be a foretaste of hell. Because no one sends us anywhere, freedom not being a theater, it is we ourselves who make the choice. Love existence, and you have chosen heaven. Hate it, and there you have chosen hell. Now, God is, with respect to free beings, either the ruling king in the sense of authority, such as that taught by the fourth Arcanum of the Tarot, or the crucified. He is king with regard to those beings who voluntarily accept, who believe his authority. He is crucified with respect to those beings who abuse their freedom and worship idols, i.e., who replace divine authority by a substitute. King and crucified at one and the same time. This is the mystery of Pilate's inscription on the cross of Calvary. Jesus Nazarenos Rex Jeodorum, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. Almighty and powerless, both at once. This is why miracles of healing in human history were able to be accomplished by saints, whilst bloody wars and disasters raged amongst them, or raged around them. Freedom. Freedom is the true throne of God and is his cross at the same time. Freedom is the key to comprehension of the role of God in history, to comprehension of the God of love and the God King, without the sacrilege of making him a tyrant and without the blasphemy of doubting his power or doubting his very existence. God is all-powerful in history inasmuch as there is faith, and he is crucified insofar as one turns away from him. Thus, divine crucifixion follows from the fact of freedom or the fact of the real existence of beings of the 10 hierarchies, when it is a matter of the world governed by divine authority and not by compulsion. Let us now turn to the idea of the simsum, or the withdrawal of God, of the Lurianic school of the Kabbalah. The doctrine of simsum reveals one of the three mysteries in the Kabbalah. And I'm sorry to my Jewish friends for butchering this pronunciation, but I'm going to do my best here. Sod Hajichud. He transliterates it as SodhajjIchud is the transliteration he gives. The mystery of union. Sodhat Simsum, the mystery of the concentration or divine withdrawal. Sod Halgilgul, the mystery of reincarnation or the revolution of souls. The other two mysteries, the mystery of union and that of the revolution of souls, will be treated later in other letters, letter 10, for example, which is the letter I just covered in the conversation with Daniel Garner, part of it. We're mostly focused on, specifically on the myth of the serpent and the closed circle and the open circle from that letter. Concerning the mystery of the divine withdrawal or concentration, which interests us here, it is the question of the thesis that the existence of the universe is rendered possible by the act of contraction of God within himself. God made a place for the world in abandoning a region interior to himself. The first act of Ein Sof, the infinite being, is therefore not a step outside, but a step inside. Movement of recoil, of falling back upon oneself, of withdrawing into oneself. Instead of emanation, we have the opposite, contraction. The first act of all is not an act of revelation, but one of limitation. Only in the second act does God send out a ray of his light and begin his revelation, or rather his unfolding as God the Creator, in the primordial space of his own creation. More than that, every new act of emanation and manifestation is preceded by one of concentration and retraction. This is a quote from a book called Major Trends in Jewish Mysticism by Gershom Scholem, which was published in 1955. Quote comes from page 261 of that text. In other words, in order to create the world ex nihilo, God had first to bring the void itself into existence. He had to withdraw in order to create a mystical space, a space without his presence, the void. And it is in thinking And it is in thinking this thought that we assist at the birth of freedom. For as Berdyaev has formulated it, freedom is not determined by God. It is part of the nothing of which God created the world. This is from Berdyaev's Destiny of Man, published in 1937, page 33. And this is an English translation published in London in 1937. The void, the mystical space from which God withdrew himself through his act of simsum. I don't know if anybody saw Pajot's video on the void recently. I saw that it came out, but I haven't seen it yet. I wonder how much of that will align with what Tomberg's saying here. Might have to catch that and see. I'm sure I'll have some reaction of some kind. Let me go back, and since I just interrupted myself, the void, the mystical space from which God withdrew himself through his act of simsum, is the place of the origin of freedom, i.e., the place of the origin of an existence. And he has it in quotation marks, and he puts a hyphen in between X and instance, which is absolute potentiality, not in any way determined. And all of the beings of the 10 created hierarchies are the children of God in freedom, born of the divine plenitude and the void. They carry within themselves a drop of the void and a spark of God. Their existence, their freedom, is the void within them. Their essence, their spark of love, is the divine blood within them. And the blood is here in quotation marks. They are immortal because the void, the reason he's in quotation marks is he's using it symbolically. They are immortal because the void is indestructible, and the monad proceeding from God is also indestructible. Further, these two indestructible elements, the maionic element and the pleromic element, are indissolubly bound to one another. The idea of simsum, the withdrawal of God in order to create freedom, and that of divine crucifixion on account of freedom, are in complete accordance. For the withdrawal of God in order to make a space for freedom and his renunciation of the use of his power against the abuse of freedom, determined within limits, are only two aspects of the same idea. It goes without saying that the idea of simsum, that of divine crucifixion, is inapplicable when God is conceived of in the sense of pantheism. Pantheism, like materialism, does not admit the real existence of individual beings. Therefore, the fact of freedom, not merely apparent freedom, is excluded. For pantheism and materialism, there is no question, and cannot be, of a divine withdrawal or divine crucifixion. On the other hand, the Kabbalistic doctrine of simsum is the only serious explanation that I know concerning creation ex nihilo, which is of a kind to act as a counterbalance to pure and simple pantheism. Moreover, it constitutes a deep link between the Old and New Testament, and bringing to light the cosmic significance of the idea of sacrifice. Now, the reflection of the idea of divine withdrawal and divine crucifixion is found to be indicated, as we have seen, in the fourth Arcanum of the Tarot, the Emperor. The Emperor reigns by pure authority. He reigns over free beings, i.e., not by means of the sword, but by means of the scepter. The scepter itself bears a globe with a cross above. The scepter, therefore, expresses in as clear as possible a manner the central idea of the Arcanum. Just as the world, the globe, is ruled by the cross, so is the power of the emperor over the terrestrial globe subject to the sign of the cross. The power of the emperor reflects divine power. And just as the latter is affected by divine contraction, simsum, and voluntary divine powerlessness, crucifixion, so the power of the emperor is affected by the contraction of his personal forces, the belt drawn tight by the emperor, by the voluntary immobility, the crossed legs of the emperor, at his post, the seat or the throne of the emperor. The post of the emperor. What an abundance of ideas concerning the post, its historical mission, its functions in the light of natural right, and its role in the light of divine right of the emperor of Christendom are to be found amongst medieval authors. Exclamation point. As it is suitable that the institution of a city or a kingdom be made according to the model of the institution of the world, similarly it is necessary to draw from divine government the order, ratio, of the government of a city. This is the fundamental thesis advanced on the subject by St. Thomas Aquinas, De Regno 14:1. This is why the authors of the Middle Ages could not imagine Christianity without an emperor, just that they could not imagine the universal church without a pope. Because if the world is governed hierarchically, Christianity or the sanctum imperium cannot be otherwise. Hierarchy is a pyramid which exists only when it is complete. And it is the emperor who is at its summit. Then come the kings, dukes, noblemen, citizens, and peasants. But it is the crown of the emperor which confers royalty to the crowns from which the ducal crowns and all other crowns in turn derive their authority. The post of the emperor is nevertheless not only that of the last, or rather the first instance of sole legitimacy, but it was also magical, if we understand by magic the action of correspondences between that which is below and that which is above. It was the principle itself of authority from which all lesser authorities derive not only their legitimacy, but also their hold over the consciousness of the people. This is why royal crowns, one after another, lost their luster and were eclipsed after the imperial crown was eclipsed. Monarchies are unable to exist for long without the monarchy. Kings cannot apportion the crown and scepter of the emperor among themselves and pose as emperors in their particular countries, because the shadow of the emperor is always present. And if in the past it was the emperor who gave luster to the royal crowns, it was later the shadow of the absent emperor which obscured the royal crowns and consequently all other crowns, those of dukes, princes, counts, etc. A pyramid is not complete without its summit. Hierarchy does not exist when it is incomplete. Without an emperor, there will be sooner or later no more kings. When there are no kings, there will be sooner or later no more nobility. When there is no more nobility, there will be sooner or later no more bourgeoisie or peasants. This is how one arrives at the dictatorship of the proletariat, the class hostile to the hierarchical principle, which latter, however, is a reflection of the divine order. This is why the proletariat professes atheism. Tomberg fled communist Russia, which is pretty well reflected in the sentiments there. Europe is haunted by the shadow of the emperor. One senses his absence just as vividly in former times one senses his presence, because the emptiness of the wound speaks. That which we miss knows how to make us sense it. Napoleon, eyewitness to the French Revolution, understood the direction which Europe had taken, the direction toward the complete destruction of hierarchy. And he sensed the shadow of the emperor. He knew what had to be restored in Europe, which was not the royal throne of France, because kings cannot exist for long without the emperor, but rather the imperial throne of Europe. So he decided to fill the gap himself. He made himself emperor, and he made his brothers kings. But it was to the sword that he took recourse. Instead of ruling by the scepter, the globe bearing the cross, he made a decision to rule by the sword. But all who take up the sword will perish by the sword. Hitler also had the delirium of desire to occupy the empty place of the emperor. He believed he could establish the 1,000-year empire of tyranny by means of the sword. But again, all those who take up the sword will perish by the sword. No, this is really important, this section here. No, the post of the emperor does not belong any longer either to those who desire it or to the choice of the people. It is reserved to the choice of heaven alone. It has become occult. Here he means just hidden. And the crown, the scepter, the throne, the coat of arms of the emperor are to be found in the catacombs. In the catacombs, this means to say under absolute protection. And it is under this absolute protection, as should be evident from what he says here about the choice of heaven, because the post of the emperor is reserved for Christ alone. Now the emperor on the fourth card is alone, without a court or retinue. His throne is in no way to be found in a room of the imperial palace, but rather in the open, and the open of an uncultivated field, not located in a town. A meager clump of grass by his foot is there as the whole imperial court, as the witness of his imperial splendor, but the clear sky is spread above him. He is a silhouette on the background of the sky, alone in the presence of the sky. This is how the emperor is. One could ask, Why is the astonishing fact that the emperor is found with his throne in the open air, under the starry sky, if you wish, overlooked by so many authors on the tarot? Why have they not stated the fact that the emperor is alone, without a court or a retinue? I believe that it's because I believe that it is because it is rarely that one lets the symbol, the image of the symbol as such, say all it has to say through its unique context. One lets it say a little, and then one suddenly more interested in one's own thoughts, i.e., what one has to say oneself rather than what the symbol has to say. Yet the card is specific. The emperor is alone in open air in an uncultivated field with a tuft of grass as his only company, save for the sky and the earth. The card teaches us the arcanum of the authority of the emperor, although it may be unrecognized, occult, unknown, and underappreciated. It is a matter of the crown, the scepter, the throne, and the coat of arms being guarded, without any witnesses other than the sky and the earth, by a solitary man leaning against the throne, with his legs crossed, wearing a crown, holding the scepter and clasping his belt. It is authority as such, and it is the post of authority as such which is expressed here. Authority is the magic and spiritual profundity filled with wisdom. Or in other words, it is the result of magic based on gnosis due to mystical experience. Authority is the second hey of the divine name, Yud He Vav He. But it is not the second hey taken separately. It is only when the whole divine name manifests itself. For this reason, it is more correct to say that the authority is the completely manifested divine name. This reinforces the point I made earlier about why the emperor is now occulted and why it is in the catacombs awaiting the choice of heaven. The completely manifested divine name signifies at the same time a post, the post of the emperor, or the state of the consciousness of the complete synthesis of mysticism, gnosis, and sacred magic. And again, this is a reminder here, I said this earlier on, but in case you're just joining us now, when Tomberg uses those terms, mysticism, gnosis, and magic, what his meaning is for mysticism, the best way to explain it is the experience of God. Gnosis is the understanding of spiritual realities, and magic is the participation in divine action, as opposed to the sorcerous expression of one's own will. Authority is the magic of spiritual profundity filled with wisdom, or in other words, is the result of magic based on gnosis due to mystical experience. Authority is that's already read that part. Okay, let's see. The completely manifested divine name signifies at the same time the post of the emperor, or the state of consciousness of complete synthesis of mysticism, gnosis, and sacred magic. And it is this state of consciousness of complete synthesis which is initiation. Initiation, understood not in the sense of ritual, nor in the sense of the possession of information held to be a secret, but rather in the sense of the state of consciousness where eternity and the present moment are one. It is the simultaneous vision of the temporal and the eternal, of that which is below and that which is above. The formula of initiation remains always the same. This unity, actualized, contemplated, practiced, and understood, is initiation, or the sanctification of the divine name in man, which is the deeper meaning of the first petition of the Pater Noster, Sanctificator Nomen Tuum. The emperor signifies the authority of initiation or of the initiate. It is due to the complete divine name, from the Kabbalistic point of view, to the magical great arcanum, from the point of view of magic, and to the philosopher's stone from the point of view of alchemy. It is, in other words, the unity and synthesis of mysticism, gnosis, and magic. This unity or synthesis we have designated in the second letter as Hermetic philosophy, bound up with the Hermetic philosophical sense. This Hermetic philosophy, it is necessary to repeat, does not signify a philosophy derived or disengaged from the organism or the unity of mysticism, gnosis, and sacred magic. It is the very unity in manifestation. Hermetic philosophy is inseparable from the unity of mysticism, gnosis, magic. It is the second hey from the divine name. It is the authority or manifestation of the unity, mysticism, gnosis, magic. Hermetic philosophy corresponds to the stage of verissimum, most true. in that which is verum sine mendatio et certum. It is true without falsehood and certain, in the epistological formula of the Emerald Table. For it is this which is the summary of all mystical experience, Gnostic revelation, and practical magic. It is spontaneous mystical experience which becomes true, verum, or reflected in consciousness, gnosis, and then becomes certum, through its magical realization, which is then reflected a second time, the second hey, or the second gnosis of the divine name. In the domain of pure thought, based on pure experience, where it is examined and fully summarized, it thus becomes most true, verissimum. The formula, verum sine mendatio certum est verissimum, therefore states the principle of epistemology, or gnoseology, of Hermetic philosophy, with its triple touchstone. This principle can be formulated in several ways. Here is one. That which is absolutely subjective, pure mystical experience, must objectivize itself in consciousness and be accepted there as true, Gnostic revelation, then proved to be certain by its objective fruits, sacred magic. And lastly, proved to be absolutely true in light of pure thought based on pure subjective and objective experience, Hermetic philosophy. It is, as a matter, therefore, of the four different senses, the mystical senses of spiritual touch, the Gnostic sense of spiritual hearing, the magical sense of spiritual vision, and lastly, the Hermetic philosophical sense, or sense of spiritual comprehension. The triple touchstone of Hermetic philosophy is therefore the intrinsic value of revelation, verum sine mendatio, its constructive fruitfulness, certum, and its concordance with earlier revelations, or the laws of thought and all available experience, verissimum. In Hermetic philosophy, something is absolutely true, therefore, only when it is of divine origin and bears the fruit in conformity with its origin and is accordant with the categorical exigencies of thought and experience. The Hermeticist is therefore a person who is at one and the same time a mystic, a Gnostic, a magician, and a realist idealist philosopher. Tomberg talks more about the synthesis of realism and idealism, and realism and nominalism in letter 9. We'll get to that at some point. He is here a realist idealist philosopher because he relies as much on experience as on speculative thought, as much on facts as on ideas, because facts and ideas are for him only two aspects of the same reality ideality, i.e. the same truth. Hermetic philosophy, being the summary and synthesis of mysticism, gnosis, and sacred magic, is not a philosophy among other philosophies or a particular philosophical system amongst other philosophical systems. Just as the Catholic Church, being Catholic or universal, cannot consider itself as a particular church among other particular churches, nor consider its dogmas as religious opinions among other religious opinions or confessions. So Hermetic philosophy, being the synthesis of all that which is essential in the spiritual life of humanity, cannot consider itself as a philosophy amongst others. Presumption? It would be, without any doubt, a monstrous presumption if it were a matter of human invention instead of revelation from above. In fact, if you have a truth revealed from above, if the acceptance of this truth brings miracles of healing, peace, and vivification, and with it, lastly, it explains to you 1,000 unexplained things that are inexplicable without it, can you then consider it as an opinion among other opinions? Dogmatism? Yes. If one understands by dogma a certainty due to revelations of divine worth, which were fruitful and constructive, and due to the confirmation that they receive from reason and experience together. When one has certainty based on the concordance of divine revelation, divine human operation, and human understanding, how can one act as if one did not have it? Is it truly necessary to deny 3 times before the cock crows in order to be accepted into the good company of free spirits and non-dogmatics, and to be chauffeured along with them by the fire of things relating to human creation? Heresy? Yes, if by heresy one understands the primacy of universal revelation, of good works universally recognized as such, and the ideal of universality amongst philosophies. Hermetic philosophy is not a particular philosophy amongst particular existing philosophies. It is not so already for the sole reason that it does not operate with univocal concepts and their verbal definitions as do philosophies, but rather with arcana and their symbolic expressions. Compare the Emerald Table with the Critique of Pure Reason by Kant, and you will see the difference. The Emerald Table states fundamental arcana of mystical, Gnostic, magical, philosophical work. The Critique of Pure Reason elaborates an edifice composed of univocal concepts, such as the categories of quantity, quality, relation, and modality, which altogether portray the transcendental method of Kant, i.e., the method of thinking about the act of thought, or the reflection about reflection. This method, however, is an aspect of the 18th Arcanum of the Tarot, the moon, as we shall see. And this Arcanum, expressed by the symbol of the card, the moon, teaches in the Hermetic way the essence of what Kant taught in a philosophical way about the transcendental method. So, is Hermetic philosophy only symbolism, pure and simple? Has it nothing to do with the methods of philosophical and scientific reasoning? Yes and no. Yes, insofar as Hermetic philosophy is of an esoteric nature, it consists of arcana oriented toward the mystery and expressed in symbols. No, insofar as it exercises a stimulating effect on the philosophical and scientific reasoning of its adherents. It is wrapped, so to say, in a philosophical and scientific intellectual penumbra, which is due to the activity of its adherents pursuing the aim of translating, insofar as it is possible to do so, the arcana and the symbols of Hermetic philosophy into univocal concepts and verbal definitions. It is a process of crystallization, because the translation of multivocal concepts or arcana into univocal concepts is comparable to the transition from the state of organic life to the mineral state. It is thus that the occult sciences such as the Kabbalah, astrology, and alchemy are derived from Hermetic philosophy. These sciences are able to have their own secrets, but the arcana, which are reflected in them, belong to the domain of Hermetic philosophy. Insofar as the intellectualization of Hermetic philosophy is the nature of commentary and corollary, it is legitimate and even indispensable. For then one will translate each arcanum into many univocal concepts, 3, for example. By this very fact, one will help the intellect to habituate itself to think hermetically, i.e., in the multivocal concepts of or arcana. But when the intellectualization of Hermetic philosophy pursues the aim of creating an autonomous system of univocal concepts without formal contradiction between them, it commits an abuse. For instead of helping human reason to raise itself above itself, it would set up a greater obstacle for it. It would captivate it instead of freeing it. The occult sciences are therefore derived from Hermetic philosophy by way of intellectualization. This is why one should not consider symbols, the major arcana of the tarot, for example, as allegorical expressions of theories or concepts of these sciences. For it is the opposite which is true. It is the doctrines of the occult sciences which are derived from symbols of the tarot or other symbols, and it is they which are to be considered as intellectually allegorical expressions of the symbols and arcana of Hermetic esotericism. Thus, it would not do to say the fourth card, the Emperor, is the symbol of the astrological doctrine concerning Jupiter. One would rather say the arcanum of the fourth card, the Emperor, is also revealed in the astrological doctrine concerning Jupiter. The correspondences, as such, remains intact. But there is a world of difference between these two statements here, because in the case of the first statement, one remains an astrologer and nothing but an astrologer. Whilst in the case of the second statement, one is thinking as a Hermeticist, although remaining an astrologer if one is one. Hermetic philosophy is not composed of the Kabbalah, astrology, magic, and alchemy. These four branches sprouting from the trunk do not make the trunk. Rather, they live from the trunk. The trunk is the manifested unity of mysticism, gnosis, and sacred magic. There are no theories. There is only experience, including here the intellectual experience of arcana and symbols. Mystical experience is the root. The Gnostic experience of revelation is its sap, and the experience or practice of sacred magic is its wood. For this reason, its teaching, or the body of its tradition, consists of spiritual exercises, and all its arcana, including the arcana of the tarot, are practical spiritual exercises whose aim is to awaken from sleep ever deeper layers of consciousness. Necessary commentaries and corollaries accompany this practice and constitute the bark of the trunk. This is the key to the practice and constitute the bark of the trunk. This is the key to the, pardon me. Thus, the key to the Apocalypse of St. John is nowhere to be found. For it is not at all a matter of interpreting it with a view to extracting a philosophical, metaphysical, or historical system. The key to the Apocalypse is to practice it, i.e., to make use of it as a book of spiritual exercises which awaken from sleep ever deeper layers of consciousness. The 7 letters to the churches, the 7 seals of the sealed book, the 7 trumpets, and the 7 vials signify altogether a course of spiritual exercises composed of 28 exercises. For as the Apocalypse is a revelation put into writing, it is necessary in order to understand it to establish in oneself a state of consciousness which is suited to receive revelations. It is the state of concentration without effort, taught by the first Arcanum, followed by a vigilant inner silence, taught by the second Arcanum, which becomes an inspired activity of imagination and thought. Whereas the conscious self acts together with the superconsciousness, the teaching of the third Arcanum. Lastly, the conscious self halts its creative activity and contemplates, and letting pass in review, everything which preceded, with a view to summarizing it, the practical teaching of the fourth Arcanum. The mastery of these 4 psychurgical operations, symbolized by the magician, the high priestess, the empress, and the emperor, is the key to the Apocalypse. One will search in vain for another. The Gospels, likewise, are spiritual exercises, i.e., one has not only to read and reread them, but also to plunge entirely into their element, to breathe their air, to participate as an eyewitness, as it were, on the events described there. And all this not in a scrutinizing way, but as an admirer with ever-growing admiration. The Old Testament also contains parts which are spiritual exercises. The Jewish Kabbalists, the authors of the Zohar, for example, made such use of it, and it is thus that the Kabbalah originated and that it lives. The difference between Kabbalists and other faithful and the other faithful depends only on the fact that the former drew spiritual exercises from the scripture, whilst the latter studied it and believed it. The aim of spiritual exercises is depth. It is necessary to become deep in order to be able to attain experience and knowledge of profound things. And it is symbolism, which is the language of depth. Thus, arcana, expressed by symbols, are both the means and aim of the spiritual exercises of which the living tradition of Hermetic philosophy is composed. Spiritual exercises, in common with the common link that unites spiritual exercises in common, form the common link that unites Hermeticists. It is not knowledge in common which unites them, but rather the spiritual exercises and the experience which goes hand in hand with them. If 3 people from different countries were to meet each other, having made the book of Genesis by Moses, the Gospel of St. John, and the vision of Ezekiel the subject of spiritual exercises for many years, they would do so in brotherhood, although the one would know the history of humanity, the other would have the science of healing, and the third would make a profound Kabbalist. That which one knows is a result of personal experience and orientation, whilst depth, the niveau to which one attains, disregarding the aspect and extent of knowledge one has gained, is that which one has in common. Hermeticism, the Hermetic tradition, is in the first place and above all a certain degree of depth, a certain niveau of consciousness. And it is the practice of spiritual exercises which safeguards this. With respect to the knowledge of individual Hermeticists, and this is applicable to initiates also, it depends upon the individual vocation of each one of them. The task that one pursues determines the nature and extent not only of knowledge, but also of the personal experience upon which that knowledge is based. One has the experience and gauge knowledge of that which is necessary for the accomplishment of the task which proceeds from one's individual vocation. In other words, one knows that which is necessary in order to be informed and be able to orient oneself in the domain relevant to one's individual vocation. Thus, a Hermeticist's vocation is healing, would know things about the relationships existing between consciousness, the system of the lotus flowers or chakras, the nervous system, and the symbol of the endocrine glands, that another Hermeticist, whose vocation is the spiritual history of humanity, would not know. But this latter, in his turn, would know things ignored by the healer, facts of the past and the present concerning the relationships between the spiritual hierarchies in humanity, between which took place or is taking place above and that which took place or is taking place below. But this knowing, insofar it is not a matter of arcana, consists of facts, though often of a purely spiritual nature, and not theories. Thus, for example, reincarnation is in no way a theory which one has to believe or not believe. In Hermeticism, no one would dream of putting forward a case in order to persuade or even to dissuade people of the truth of reincarnation's theory. He has that in quotation marks. For the Hermeticists, it is a fact which is either known through experience or ignored, just as one does not make propaganda for or against the fact that we sleep at night and wake up anew each morning, for this is a matter of experience. So the fact that we die and are born anew is a matter of experience. Either one has certainty about it or one does not. Those who are certain should know that ignorance of reincarnation often has very profound and even sublime reasons associated with the vocation of the person in question. One, for example, a person has a vocation which demands a maximum of concentration in the present. He may renounce all spiritual memories of the past, because the awakened memory is not always beneficial. It is often a burden. It is so, above all, when it is a matter of vocation which demands an attitude entirely free of prejudice, as is the case with the vocations of priest, doctor, and judge. The priest, doctor, and judge have to concentrate themselves in such a way that the task of the present that they must not be distracted by memories of former existences. One can perform miracles without the memory of former lives, as was the case with the Holy Vicar of Ars, and one can also perform miracles wholly in possession of this memory, as was the case of Monsieur Philippe of Lyons. For reincarnation is neither a dogma, i.e., a truth necessary for salvation, nor a heresy, i.e., a contrary to a truth necessary for salvation. It simply is a fact of experience, just as sleep and heredity are. As such, it is neutral. Everything depends on its interpretation. One can interpret it in such a manner as to make it a hymn to the glory of God, and one can interpret it in such a way as to make it a blasphemy. When one says to forgive is to grant the opportunity to begin again, God forgives more than 70 times 7, always granting us opportunities anew. What infinite goodness of God! Here is an interpretation to the glory of God. But when one says there is a mechanism of infinite evolution and one is morally determined by previous lives, there is no grace, there is only the law of cause and effect, and this is a blasphemous interpretation. It reduces God to the function of an engineer of a moral machine. Reincarnation is in no way an exception to what is liable to a double interpretation. In fact, every pertinent fact is liable to it. Thus, for example, heredity can be interpreted in the sense of complete determinism, therefore excluding freedom, and thus also morality. Or rather, it can be interpreted as a possibility for gradual improvement of the organism in order to render it a more perfect instrument to vocations for posterity. Didn't Abraham receive the promise that the Messiah would come in his lineage? Wasn't the same promise given to David? Nevertheless, whatever the personal interpretation of a fact may be, a fact remains a fact, and it is necessary to know it when one wants to orient oneself in the domain to which it belongs. Thus, Hermeticists have knowledge of diverse facts, according to their personal vocations. But Hermetic philosophy is nevertheless not the sum total of knowledge acquired by individuals. It is an organism of arcana expressed in symbols, which are at the same time both spiritual exercises and their resulting aptitudes. An arcanum practiced as a spiritual exercise for a sufficient length of time becomes an aptitude. It does not give the pupil knowledge of new facts, but makes him suited to acquire such knowledge when he has need of it. Initiation is the capacity of orienting oneself in every domain and acquiring there knowledge of relevant facts, the key facts. The initiate is one who knows how to attain knowledge, i.e., one who knows how to ask, seek, and put into practice the appropriate means in order to succeed. Spiritual exercises alone have taught him, no theory or doctrine, however luminous, may in any way have rendered him capable of knowing how to know. Spiritual exercises have taught him practical sense, and in Hermetic philosophy, there is no other sense than the practical. And the infallible effectiveness of the arcanum of the three united endeavors, which is the basis of every spiritual exercise and every arcanum, namely, ask and it will be given to you, seek and you will find, knock and it will be opened unto you. Luke 11:9. Thus, Hermetic philosophy does not teach that one ought to believe Thus, Hermetic philosophy does not teach one what one ought to believe concerning God, man, and nature, but it teaches rather how to ask, seek, and knock in order to arrive at mystical experience, Gnostic illumination, and the magical effect of that which one seeks to know about God, man, and nature. And it is after having asked, sought, and knocked, after one has received, found, and gained access, that one knows. This kind of knowing, the certainty of the synthetic comprehension of mystical experience, Gnostic revelation, and magical effect, is the emperor. This is the practical teaching of the fourth card of the tarot. It is a matter here of the development and usage of the fourth spiritual sense, i.e., the Hermetic philosophical sense, following the development and usage of the mystical, Gnostic, and magical senses. The aptitude for knowing how to know is the characteristic trait essential to the sense. We have defined it above, the second letter, as the sense of synthesis. We are now able to advance and do so in a much more profound way in defining it as the initiate sense, or the sense of orientation and acquisition of knowledge of essential fact in every domain. How does this sense function? There is reason to indicate in the first instance that this is not identical with what one customarily designates as metaphysical sense, since this metaphysical sense of metaphysicians is the taste and capacity for living in abstract theories, the liking for abstract, whilst the Hermetic philosophical sense is on the contrary due to the orientation toward the concrete, spiritual, psychic, and physical. Whilst the metaphysical sense operates with the concept of God, the Hermetic philosophical sense is oriented toward the living God, the spiritual concrete fact of God. The Christian celestial father and the Ancient of Days of the Kabbalists is not an abstract concept. It is not a notion, but rather a being. The metaphysical sense is in such a matter as to deduce, by ways of abstraction, the laws of facts and the principles of laws. The Hermetic philosophical sense, or initiate sense, in contrast, perceives through the facts the entities of the spiritual hierarchies, and through them the living God. For the initiate sense, the space between the supreme principle and the domain of facts is not peopled with laws and principles, but rather with living spiritual beings, each endowed with a manner, look, voice, way of speaking, and name. For the initiate sense, the Archangel Michael is not a law or principle. He is a living being whose face is invisible because it has given place to the face of God. This is why he has the name Michael, he who is as God. One could endure the vision of the face of Michael because he is Kael, like unto God. No one could endure the vision of the face of Michael because he is Kael, like unto God. The Hermetic philosophical sense, or initiate sense, is that of concrete spiritual realities. The Hermeticist explains facts not by laws obtained by abstraction, much less still by principles obtained by active abstraction, but rather by proceeding from abstract facts to more concrete beings in order to arrive at that which is most concrete, that alone in existence which is absolutely concrete, i.e., God. Because for the initiate sense, God is that which is most real and therefore most concrete. In fact, amongst all that exists, God is that alone which is absolutely real and concrete, whilst created beings are only relatively real and concrete, and what we designate as concrete fact is in reality only an abstraction from divine reality. This does not mean to say that the Hermeticist is incapable of abstraction and that he necessarily neglects laws and principles. He is a human being and therefore also possesses the metaphysical sense. In possessing it, he makes use of it like everyone else. But what makes him a Hermeticist, and the sense of the Emperor of the Tarot, is the Hermetic philosophical sense. He is as much a Hermeticist as he is endowed with Hermetic philosophical sense and makes use of this, whilst the metaphysical sense alone would never make a Hermeticist in the proper sense of the word. Is this not the tragedy of René Guénon, who, being gifted with a developed metaphysical sense and yet lacking the Hermetic philosophical sense, sought always and everywhere the concrete spiritual? And finally, tired of the world of abstractions, he hoped to find liberation from intellectualism by plunging himself into the elements of fervor of the Muslim masses in prayer in a Cairo mosque. the last hope of a soul thirsty for mystical experience and languishing in the captivity of the intellect. And that's actually is a question. My intonation was wrong there. If so, may divine mercy grant him what he sought so much. There is room to remark here that the last orientation of renunciation, i.e. toward the faith of simpler people adhering to a more simple religion, is not without reason. For the Hermetic philosophical sense has more in common with the plain and sincere faith of simple people than abstract metaphysics has. For the common believer, God lives, likewise for the Hermeticists. For the believer addresses himself to saints and angels. For the Hermeticists, they are real. The believer believes in miracles. The Hermeticist lives in the presence of miracles. The believer prays for the living and the dead. The Hermeticist dedicates all his efforts in the domain of sacred magic to the good of the living and the dead. The believer esteems all which is traditional. The Hermeticist does likewise. What more is there to say? Perhaps that the emperor owes his authority not to his power, visible or invisible, over human beings, but rather because he represents them before God. He has authority not because he is superhuman, but rather because he is very human, because he represents all that which is human. King David was more human than all men of his time. This is why he was anointed by divine order by the prophet Samuel. This is the reason the Eternal gave him the solemn promise that his throne will be established forever. The throne, the post of the representative of humanity, will therefore never perish. And it is this which is the post of the emperor. It is this which is true authority. Hermetic philosophy also has a human ideal, to which it aspires. Its spiritual exercises, its arcana, follow the practical aim of realizing the man of authority, the father man. This is the man who is more human than all others, the man worthy of the throne of David. The human ideal of practical Hermeticism is not the Superman of Nietzsche, nor the Superman of India plunged into contemplation of eternity, nor the Superman Hierophant of Gurdjieff, nor the Superman philosopher of Stoic and Vedanta philosophies. No, its human ideal is the man who is human to such a degree that he contains and bears in himself all that which is human, that he may be the guardian of the throne of David. And the divine? How is it here that which concerns the manifestation of the divine? Practical Hermeticism is alchemy. The ideal of Hermeticism is essentially and fundamentally the alchemical idea. This means to say, the more one becomes truly human, the more one manifests the divine element underlying human nature, which is the image and likeness of God. The ideal of abstraction invites human beings to do away with human nature, to dehumanize. In contrast, the ideal of alchemical transformation of Hermeticism offers to human beings the way to the realization of true human nature, which is the image and likeness of God. Hermeticism is the rehumanization of all elements of human nature. It is their return to their true essence. Just as all base metals can be transformed into silver and into gold, so all the forces of human nature susceptible to transformation into silver, in quotation marks, or gold, in quotation marks, i.e. into what they are when they share in the image and likeness of God. But in order to re-become what they are in their essence, they must be submitted to the operation of sublimation. Now, this operation is crucifying, for that which is based amongst them, and at the same time is the blossoming of that which is their true essence. The cross and the rose cross, is the symbol of this operation of the realization of the truly human man. Thus, the Emperor of the Tarot renounces the four arbitrary liberties of human nature. He is, in this sense, crucified. And as the real symbol of the emptiness, which is established because of renunciation is the wound, one can say that the Emperor is he who has four wounds. It is by these four wounds that the manifestation of the divine image and likeness of human nature is accomplished in him. The divine human nature, and what of the divine nature which transcends it? In order for the latter to manifest, it is necessary to have one wound more. It is necessary to have 5 wounds. Now it is the following card, the Pope, which will teach us the Arcanum of the manifestation of the divine transcending human nature by means of the 5 wounds. All right, that is the end of letter 4 of Meditations. I didn't really see, I kind of kept glancing over to see if there were any questions during the stream. I didn't really see any, but I will go ahead and, now that I've read the whole thing, I at least want to give people a chance to chat for a little bit and ask me questions. So let me go ahead and copy the link into the chat. And I'll wait a little bit and see if anybody wants to come in and join me, if there's any questions you want to ask. I'm sure there are lots of things that need clarification. A lot of this builds on the letters that come before it. I'm sorry I decided to do this. It's a little weird that I decided to do this out of order, but when I got that letter specifically addressing how much our previous treatment of letter 4 was appreciated, I decided to go that route. All right. All right, let's see here. Wanting to compare this to masonry. I love this, but this is masonry here. Do you mean masonry? Do you mean like do you have it lower in lowercase? So I'm thinking, do you mean it like the actual practice of being a stonemason? Okay. No, I think you mean like Mason as in Masonic. Okay. Is this what in theory will be equivalent to the Mason who has achieved thinking, feeling, and willing within his control? I don't know anything about Masonry, so I'm not qualified to answer that. However, when I talked about, there's some parallelism here, because when I talked earlier about what Tomberg means by the terms mysticism, gnosis, and magic, each of those things is tied to one of the aspects of our being. Mysticism is tied to the heart. Gnosis is tied to the thought and knowledge, obviously, and then magic is tied to the will. And so when the synthesis of those things is achieved, then it's a transformation of a complete transformation of the human being. Yeah, I figured out that. Okay, yeah, I did figure out the. I see. Oh, you clarified for me there. Yeah, I did figure out you meant esoteric Freemasonry. Don't know anything about it, but I think, the way you frame that, I do see a certain parallelism, although perhaps not an exactness. I don't. Yeah, Tomberg's background prior to becoming should be obvious from this text that he's Catholic. He's a Roman Catholic. He converted to Roman Catholicism, but he actually he began as an anthroposophist. He was a follower of Steiner, and he ended up converting to Catholicism, and kind of certainly there's a lot of anthroposophical principles in Tomberg, but he subjects them to discipline by the dogmas of the Catholic Church. All right. Any other questions? Anybody want to hop on and join me? Okay, interesting. I have the book, but I've only read The Magician over and over. Yeah, The Magician is. Honestly. So if this was a war, now that I'm feeling better, I might actually. I made a promise a while back that I was going to do a course on meditations on the tarot and cover each of the letters. And I will probably, now that I've kind of done this, I probably will go back to the beginning. The next time I do like a meditations related live stream, and I will actually go from The Magician. And it's good to read The Magician over and over, because The Magician is like, I mean, he says that the magician is the key, right? It's like it's the beginning. It's the because the magician opens up the way to mysticism. That's why, because concentration without effort is the essence of the mystical practice, which allows one to connect to the experience of God. So it's kind of the very first step. So I really love the second letter. And maybe I can be of some help to you on comprehending that. I'll definitely get to that eventually. So, yeah. All right. Well, if there are no more questions and nobody's wanting to hop in, I guess I'll go ahead and call that. I notice the stream numbers, or maybe the time. I don't know, maybe the time of the stream. I did this later. I used to do the Saturday streams like early in the morning, but the reason I probably will get back eventually. I'm going to go back to my early Saturday morning time frame that I used to do for the live streams back in the day. I'll probably get back to that. It won't always be me reading a text like this. That wasn't even the plan for the today. If you were here at the very beginning, I explained that the reason I did that is just decided to read the text and kind of explain as I went along, was because I didn't have the time to do to finish my preparation notes, because my son wanted to hang out with me this morning, and we hadn't seen each other in a while because of having completely incompatible schedules. Yeah, thank you everyone who did join. Hopefully the next one will be a little bit more polished and a little bit more exciting than this one was, because I didn't, like I said, it's like, my kid was like wanting to spend some time with me, and so even though he's a grown ass adult, but it's even hard. Sometimes it's even harder when your kids are grown to have some quality time with them, and he wanted to spend some time with me this morning, so I made that the priority. And then I had a class, so that's why I was starting it at noon, as I had a class. I'm currently reading with Michael Martin. Michael Martin is teaching a class on Pavel Florensky's The Pillar and Ground of Truth, which I kind of love-hate, to be honest with you, has been my reaction to the text. He clearly, I can tell that it's definitely clearly a source that Tomberg draws on, which isn't surprising. Tomberg is a Russian that's fairly contemporary. Their lifetimes overlap. He certainly would have been aware of Florensky. Actually, technically, Tomberg was an Estonian, but he was living in the UK at the time he wrote this particular work, Meditations. And by the way, he wrote anonymously. The edition that I'm working from has the afterword that was in the 1985 German language edition, which is written by Hans Ernst von Balthasar. So this book has a kind of a curious status within the Catholic Church. It's neither been approved or condemned, but it was thought well enough. It was thought highly enough by Cardinal von Balthasar that he wrote an afterword for the German language edition, which is the edition that's been photographed on the desk of popes. Let's see, we got another thing here. Okay, the Sophia stuff is putting a lot together for me. Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, Tomberg, it's not evident from this chapter, but it's definitely evident from the entirety of the text. Tomberg is also a Sophiologist. And the influence from the Russian Sophiologists on Tomberg's thought is definitely one of the evident streams in his thought. I had a mystical experience before I found Christ, and Tomberg Steiner is helping me to coalesce a worldview where the esoteric meets my faith. That's wonderful. Good for you. I had the same kind of experience, actually. I had a vision of whether something is a vision of Mary or Sophia, or whether you even need to make if you even need to distinguish between the two, is certainly a matter that's up for discussion. I thought I had no idea that Sophiology existed or that Sophia was a thing. So at the time I had the vision, I thought the vision was of Mary. But I think you could just as easily say it was a vision of Sophia, and it can be both. And I think really ultimately It is both, because Mary is the creaturely Sophia. So any experience of Sophia is going to have a Marian aspect to it as well, because of Mary's status as creaturely Sophia. My throat is rather dry, and I have been streaming for an hour and a half and reading aloud a lot. So since no one has chose to join me, I am going to go ahead and end the stream. Thank you very much. I appreciate the support of all those that have hung around. And I also want to apologize to the audience for being out of commission for so long. And I think it was like November was the last video I did prior to this. Prior to I just did prior to the conversation that I reached with Daniel Garner. I hadn't done anything since November. So I bless you guys several months with nothing and no word. You're going to be seeing this a lot more with just me. I've made some offers to folks to join me as Grail Country host, and there was some positive reception of the idea, but so far no one's actually agreed to follow through. I never wanted to do this show as a solo effort. That wasn't my conception. In fact, when I told Michael, part of the Grail Country lore here is that Michael Leidy is the person who encouraged me to start the channel after we had established a relationship. And I did a few things with him on Karen's channel, and we did a conversation that we recorded together with Julian on some theological topics. And Michael just kept bringing it up to me enough times that I finally said, okay, I'll do it. But my caveat was that I needed him and Sherry to do it with me, because I didn't want it to be a kind of vanity project. And so I still don't want it to be a vanity project. So I'm going to try. This is why I'm going to try to be more, and I apologize for not being able to today because I got sidetracked by hanging out with my kid. If you notice in my comeback conversation, I actually had detailed notes and had specific questions that I wanted to ask Daniel and try to be a little bit more organized. I'm going to do the same. It's a little harder for me to be free-willing if I'm just talking to a camera by myself, or if I don't, and if I'm doing an interview with just me and one other person. I think I need to be a little bit more focused in those. And so, yeah, so we'll see what it looks like going forward. Maybe I'll find a co-host. Maybe it's God's will that I try this alone, even though I was reluctant to do it. We'll find out. Thank you once again, everyone who tuned in. I promise it will not be nearly as long. I'll do another live stream next week at the same time. I don't know what it's going to be on yet. I'll see what presents itself. Hopefully it won't be just me reading a text to you on camera. Hopefully we can get something more interactive going next time. And yeah. And next conversation, see what in the pipeline in terms of like interviews. JD Lionheart has a new book out that was just released. He sent me a copy of it. He wants to come on and talk about it. I've had JD on for all of his past books, so it's kind of a tradition. I need to actually respond back to him though, give him the and let him know what date's going to work. The final part of the conversation on Bulgakov's philosophy economy that I've been doing with Marcus Shira is going to be coming out sometime in April. Not sure what the very, very next thing I do is. Maybe if anybody has any ideas of things they'd like me to do, like in the next week or two, that I might be able to set up. I'm open to suggestions. Go ahead and send them to the Grail Country email, and I'll reflect on them. Oh, and then I also just had Karen Wong send me a text that she wanted me to take a look at. And so I'm going to read that and process that. And maybe I'll end up having a conversation with Karen, which would be appropriate for my comeback because that's where I started, was on Karen's channel. So yeah, but I'll be around again. I'll try to give you guys something worth that's at least thought-provoking and sincere, that I can promise. Thanks everyone for joining me. Have a blessed day. Bye-bye.